She combined these qualities with warmth, humor, and an unerring ability always to see the best in people.
For years, it existed only as a rumor buried beneath royal ceremonies, carefully managed headlines, and palace smiles. But according to Camilla's former aide, the secret that changed everything was never truly gone. It was simply waiting for the right moment to resurface. What began as a seemingly harmless decision behind closed doors allegedly triggered a chain reaction that reshaped relationships, shattered trust, and created divisions that still haunt the monarchy today. Most shocking of all, Charles reportedly never knew the full truth. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The former aide had stayed silent for years, watching from the edge of history as the palace moved forward with polished statements, public smiles, and carefully chosen words. But behind that silence, a different story was allegedly breathing in the dark. This was not presented as a simple misunderstanding or a small private disagreement. According to the aide, it was the beginning of something much deeper, something wrapped in loyalty, fear, ambition, and betrayal. They claimed they were there when the first signs appeared, when certain conversations became shorter, certain names stopped being mentioned, and certain doors began closing before Charles could ask the right questions. At first, it seemed harmless, a decision made quietly, a message softened before being passed along, a warning delayed until it no longer mattered. But the aide now claims those small choices created a pattern, and that pattern became a weapon. What made the revelation so disturbing was not only what happened, but how long it stayed hidden. Decades passed while the palace protected the surface. Ceremonies continued. Family members stood together. Headlines were controlled. Yet behind the scenes, tension allegedly grew like a crack beneath marble. The aide suggested that several later conflicts inside the royal circle did not begin where the public thought they began. They began here, with one secret that shifted trust inside the monarchy before anyone outside could see the damage. And Charles, the man at the center of it all, was reportedly never given the complete truth. He was told enough to move forward, but not enough to understand who had shaped the path beneath his feet. That is why the aide's decision to speak now feels so explosive. It is not just a confession. It is a challenge to the version of events the palace allowed the world to believe. After years of carrying the weight, the aide finally stepped out from the shadows, not with a small claim, but with a warning. The truth was bigger than one person, deeper than one rumor, and far more dangerous than anyone expected. As the aide began revealing what really happened, attention quickly turned to a private meeting that supposedly changed the course of royal history forever. According to the aide, everything started during one forgotten gathering, attended by only a handful of trusted insiders. No official records highlighted its importance. No public announcement followed. Yet years later, those who allegedly attended would quietly rise, fall, or disappear from royal influence altogether. The aide insists that what happened inside that room set events into motion that no one, not even Charles, could stop once they began. By the time this meeting took place, the palace was already carrying quiet pressure beneath its polished surface. The aide claimed there was a feeling that something had to be managed before it grew beyond control, and that was when certain advisors began pushing a strategy that sounded careful on the outside but dangerous underneath. It was not presented as betrayal. It was presented as protection. That was what made it so powerful. The words were soft, the reasoning was polished, but the direction was unmistakable. Camilla was being placed at the center of a plan that would slowly affect influence, trust, and loyalty inside the royal circle. Some in the room allegedly believed this was necessary. Others feared it would create consequences that could not be undone. And according to the aide, those fears were ignored. The most disturbing part was what happened after the meeting ended. Charles reportedly did not receive the full weight of what had been discussed. He was given a version shaped for calm, a version that removed the sharpest edges and made everything appear routine. But behind that softened message the palace had already begun to split into quiet factions. Some aligned themselves with the new direction. Others stepped back, uneasy, watching as private conversations became guarded and old loyalties began to shift. The aide remembered the emotional pressure placed on those who knew too much. Silence was not requested openly. It was expected. No one needed to say what would happen if the wrong detail escaped. In royal life, silence can become its own command. And that was where the aide began to suspect manipulation. This was not just a meeting that went too far. It felt, according to their account, like someone had prepared the ground long before anyone sat down. Certain people knew what to say. Certain concerns were brushed aside too quickly. Certain details never reached Charles at all. What appeared to be a careful palace decision may have been something far more calculated, and the aide could not shake the feeling that the real power in the room belonged to someone who never seemed to raise their voice. But the real shock was not what happened during the meeting, it was discovering who allegedly benefited most from the secret remaining hidden. Every royal controversy seems to have visible players, but the former aide claims another figure operated almost entirely from the shadows. While public attention focused elsewhere, this individual allegedly influenced conversations, controlled information, and quietly shaped outcomes. If the aide's account is true, one person may have steered events from behind the curtain, while Charles remained convinced everything was unfolding naturally. At first, the aide did not understand the pattern. It was easy to believe the palace was simply protecting itself, because that was what the palace always did. Problems were softened. Warnings were delayed. Dangerous words were replaced with safer ones. But then the aide began noticing something more deliberate. The same advisor seemed to appear near every sensitive decision, never standing at the center, never taking public blame, but always close enough to shape what others heard, what Charles was told, and what Camilla was allowed to believe about her own position. This mysterious insider allegedly knew the power of information better than anyone. They understood that in royal life, influence does not always come from giving orders. Sometimes it comes from deciding which message arrives first, which warning is held back, and which detail is buried beneath polite language. According to the aide, certain concerns that should have reached Charles were quietly filtered until they sounded harmless. Some warnings never reached him at all. Others arrived too late, after decisions had already hardened into palace policy. And with every missing detail, Charles was pushed further into a version of events that seemed calm on the surface, but was secretly being shaped by hands he could not see. The aide described moments that slowly turned suspicion into alarm. A staff member would raise a concern, only to be told it was not the right time. Another would question whether Charles had been fully briefed, and the room would fall into a silence heavy enough to feel like a threat. People who once spoke freely began measuring every sentence. Loyalty became confused with obedience. Fear dressed itself as professionalism. And behind it all, this hidden figure allegedly grew stronger, building a quiet network of influence that did not need headlines because it had access. Access to conversations, access to schedules, access to private doubts before they became public storms. What haunted the aide most was the feeling that none of this was accidental. The timing was too precise. The same names kept appearing. The same information kept disappearing. It felt less like palace confusion and more like long-term planning, a slow tightening of control around Charles, while others adjusted to a story they had not written. And as the aide followed the trail, they realized the secret was no longer only about strategy or reputation. It had entered the private heart of the royal family, touching trust, loyalty, and wounds that could not be repaired with silence. The deeper the aide looked, the more they realized the secret wasn't simply political, it was becoming intensely personal. Palace politics can be ruthless, but the aide insists this story crossed a line few expected. What allegedly began as strategic maneuvering soon evolved into a deeply personal betrayal involving trust, loyalty, and relationships that were supposed to be unbreakable. The revelation left even seasoned insiders stunned because the people involved were among those closest to the future of the monarchy itself. By this point, the aide believed the hidden pattern had grown too large to dismiss. It was no longer only about messages being softened or warnings being delayed. It was about decisions being made around people who had every right to know the truth. Key royal figures were allegedly kept away from details that could have changed how they responded, how they trusted one another, and how they understood Camilla's rising place inside the palace machine. The damage, according to the aide, did not happen all at once. It spread quietly. One private conversation became colder. One loyal advisor stopped being invited into certain discussions. One senior household member began asking why Charles seemed unaware of things everyone else whispered about. And still, the official mood remained calm, controlled, almost polished. That contrast made the betrayal feel even sharper. On the outside, the monarchy carried itself with confidence. Behind the walls, people were allegedly beginning to doubt who was protecting whom. Charles, the aide claimed, was making choices based on incomplete information, believing he was acting with wisdom when he may have been walking through a carefully shaped version of reality. That was the cruelest part. His trust was being used against him, not loudly, not openly, but through silence, timing, and selective truth. Staff members caught in the middle felt the pressure deeply. Some wanted to speak, others feared the cost. Loyalty became a trap, because telling the truth could destroy reputations, but staying silent meant allowing the damage to continue. Rumors began moving through the household despite every effort to stop them. Quiet comments, sudden pauses, names avoided in conversation. The aide watched as confidence turned into suspicion, and suspicion slowly became fear. Those who had once believed they were serving the crown now wondered whether they had been serving someone else's ambition. And the deeper this betrayal cut, the clearer it became that the first secret had opened the door to something even more dangerous. Yet even after the betrayal, the biggest revelation remained hidden, and it involved a decision that could have changed everything. What if one crucial decision had been concealed from the very person most affected by it? The former aide claims that a choice made during the height of the crisis was never fully explained to Charles. Even more astonishing, the consequences allegedly echoed through years of royal tensions, misunderstandings, and fractured alliances. If true, it may explain mysteries that observers have debated for decades. According to the aide, this was the moment when the secret stopped being a hidden concern and became a turning point. A decision was allegedly made to redirect the flow of information around Camilla's position, protecting certain conversations while keeping Charles at a careful distance from the full truth. It was not done with loud commands or open rebellion. It was done through quiet agreement, nervous glances, and the kind of palace wording that can make a major choice sound like a routine adjustment. Those who knew what had happened reportedly understood the danger immediately. If Charles learned everything at once, the fallout could have been devastating. Trust could collapse. Advisors could be exposed. Camilla's standing could be questioned by people who had already begun to doubt the forces gathering around her. So the decision was kept narrow, sealed inside a small circle of insiders who convinced themselves that silence was safer than honesty. But safety, inside a palace, often comes with a price. Every person who stayed quiet became part of the story. Every delay made the truth heavier. Every softened explanation pushed Charles further from the reality unfolding around him. The aide remembered the reaction among those who were aware. Some were relieved, believing the crisis had been contained. Others were visibly shaken, as though they understood they had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The emotional burden began to settle over the household. Staff members carried fragments of the truth, but were forced to act as if nothing had changed. Conversations became careful, loyalties became strained, and behind the palace calm, relationships were quietly being reshaped by something no one dared say aloud. Over time, the hidden decision allegedly created a chain of misunderstandings. Charles responded to situations without knowing what had been withheld. Others judged him for choices he may not have fully understood. Old allies drifted apart, new power circles formed, and Camilla's place inside the monarchy became tied to a secret that could not remain buried forever. For the Aide, the weight became impossible to ignore. They watched the same pattern repeat half-truths, controlled messages, private damage hidden beneath public dignity. And slowly, the wall protecting the secret began to weaken. As years passed, the secret remained buried, but cracks were beginning to appear in the carefully constructed wall protecting it. Secrets rarely stay hidden forever. According to the Aide, there were countless moments when the truth nearly emerged. A misplaced comment, a tense conversation, an unexpected disagreement. Each incident threatened to expose what had happened. Yet somehow the secret survived, protected by fear, loyalty, and the belief that revealing it could trigger a royal crisis unlike anything the palace had faced before. As years moved on, the Aide claimed the palace became skilled at swallowing danger before it reached the surface. Every time someone came too close to the truth, the narrative was redirected. Every time suspicion grew, a calmer explanation appeared. And every time Charles seemed near to questioning the missing pieces, someone was ready with softer words, careful timing, and just enough reassurance to keep the old secret locked away. But silence did not bring peace. It brought weight. The people who knew fragments of what had happened allegedly carried it like a private punishment. Some became colder. Some became more cautious. Others tried to convince themselves that protecting the monarchy mattered more than exposing the wound beneath it. Yet guilt has a way of changing people. It turns ordinary conversations into tests. It makes every public moment feel like a reminder. The Aide began seeing familiar faces differently, wondering who had acted out of duty, who had acted out of fear, and who had acted for personal gain. Over the years, relationships inside the royal circle reportedly changed in ways outsiders could not fully explain. Warmth faded, trust narrowed. Certain alliances became stronger, while others quietly broke apart. Public events that once seemed simple now looked different through the Aide's eyes. A polite exchange could hide years of resentment. A controlled statement could cover deep disagreement. A united front could be nothing more than survival dressed as dignity. And through it all, the secret remained there, moving silently beneath the surface, shaping reactions, decisions, and loyalties, without ever being named. For the Aide, the struggle became unbearable. Loyalty to the crown had once meant silence, but silence now felt like complicity. They had watched the same pattern repeat again and again. Information managed, emotion buried, consequences passed on to people who never understood the whole story. The pressure grew with every near exposure, every whispered warning, every reminder that Charles may still not know the truth that had changed so much around him. The Aide began to realize that keeping the secret was no longer protecting the monarchy. It was protecting the people who had benefited from the darkness. Then came the moment that changed the Aide's mind forever and transformed silence into revelation. After years of silence, one question remained: why now? Why risk everything to reveal a secret protected for so long? The former Aide claims a recent event forced them to confront their conscience. Watching history repeat itself allegedly became unbearable, leading to a decision that would send shockwaves through royal circles and reopen wounds many believed had healed. For the Aide, this was not a sudden act of anger. It was the result of years of pressure building quietly inside them, years spent watching the same old methods return whenever the palace faced discomfort. Control the message, protect the powerful, keep Charles calm, let the truth wait. But this time, according to the Aide, something felt different. The same silence that once seemed like duty now felt like surrender. They had carried the burden for decades, and that burden had changed them. Every royal controversy reminded them of the first secret. Every carefully worded statement sounded like an echo from the past. They knew speaking out would bring consequences. Some would call them disloyal. Others would accuse them of chasing attention. The palace, they believed, would try to reduce the revelation to bitterness or exaggeration. But the Aide insisted this was not about revenge. It was about correcting a story that had been shaped by people who understood the power of keeping Charles only partly informed. Still, fear remained. Revealing the truth could damage reputations, reopen old conflicts, and shake confidence inside the monarchy at a time when stability mattered more than ever. The aide understood that once the secret left their mouth, it could not be taken back. It would raise new questions. Who approved the silence? Who benefited from it? Who watched Charles make decisions without telling him what he deserved to know? And perhaps most painfully, who allowed personal ambition to hide behind royal duty? What stunned close observers was how detailed the aide's account became. It was not just a vague accusation. It was a chain of moments, pressures, warnings, and choices that painted a picture far darker than anyone expected. The confession suggested that the monarchy's public calm had covered years of private strain and that some of the deepest wounds had never truly healed. Now, all eyes turned toward Charles. Would he dismiss it as old noise, or would he begin asking the questions that should have been asked long ago? But the aide's confession raised an even bigger question. What would happen if Charles finally learned the entire truth? As the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the former aide delivered the claim that stunned everyone. The secret was never just about one event, one person, or one decision. It was allegedly the foundation upon which years of misunderstandings, rivalries, and royal tensions were built. If Charles truly never knew, then the monarchy's modern history may look very different than anyone ever imagined. According to the aide, the hidden decision did not simply affect Camilla's position. It shaped how people trusted one another, how advisors gained power, and how Charles understood the choices being placed before him. A single concealed truth allegedly became the quiet thread running through years of palace tension, pulling people closer when it helped the story, and tearing them apart when silence became too heavy to carry. The aide's most explosive allegation was that major royal developments may have been influenced by this unseen pressure. Old conflicts suddenly looked different. Decisions once explained as tradition, timing, or duty now appeared tied to deeper private calculations. The aide suggested that some relationships were judged unfairly because the full story had never been shared. Others may have gained protection they did not deserve, and Charles, standing at the center of it all, may have been reacting to shadows instead of facts. That possibility changed everything. It turned the secret from gossip into a question of accountability. Who allowed it to continue? Who decided Charles could be guided without being fully informed? Who watched the damage spread and still chose silence? These questions cut through the palace's carefully guarded image. Because if the aide's account is true, the emotional cost was enormous. Charles was not merely kept away from a detail. He was allegedly kept away from the truth behind decisions that touched loyalty, love, duty, and the future of the crown itself. For a monarchy built on trust, that is not a small wound. It is a fracture beneath the foundation. The possible consequences were impossible to ignore. Some royal relationships could be forced into painful reassessment. Old alliances might suddenly appear suspicious. Private loyalties could be tested again. And Camilla's connection to the buried secret would invite fresh debate over who knew, who suspected, and who benefited from silence. Yet even with the aide's confession, the story still felt unfinished. Too many names remained unspoken. Too many motives remained covered. Too many moments still begged for explanation. The aide had opened the door, but what waited beyond it seemed even darker than the revelation itself. And just when it seemed every answer had finally emerged, one final mystery remained hanging over the palace. The former aide may have revealed the secret, but one haunting question continues to linger over the monarchy. Was Charles truly the only person left in the dark? The answer could determine whether this was a story of deception, protection, ambition, or something even more unsettling. Because sometimes the most dangerous secret is not the one that gets exposed, it is the one that still remains hidden. After the aide's confession, every unanswered detail seemed to carry new weight. Who first decided silence was safer than truth? Who watched Charles move through the years without correcting the story around him? and who still knows more than they are willing to admit. That uncertainty is what makes this revelation so powerful. The Aide may have pulled one secret into the open, but the palace still appears surrounded by questions. There may be more conversations that were never repeated, more warnings that never reached the right ears, and more motives hidden beneath the language of duty. Some may argue the silence was meant to protect the crown from scandal. Others may see something darker: ambition dressed as loyalty, control hidden behind service, and emotional damage treated as the price of royal survival. For the royal family, the impact would not be limited to reputation, it would cut into trust itself. If Charles was kept from the truth, then every relationship touched by that secret would be forced into painful doubt. Loyalty would no longer feel simple. Power would no longer look clean. Even forgiveness would become complicated, because how do you forgive what you were never allowed to fully understand? The Aide's confession leaves behind a legacy of unease, not because it answers everything, but because it reveals how much may still be buried. And that is where the story refuses to end quietly. The monarchy can survive storms, headlines, and public judgment, but secrets have a different kind of power. They wait. They grow heavier. They return when the people who buried them least expect it. The former Aide has opened the first door, yet another may still remain locked behind it. Perhaps another insider knows the missing piece. Perhaps another name is still being protected. Perhaps Charles was not the only one kept in the dark after all. The secret may finally be public, but the shadows it created are only beginning to reveal their true shape. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.